delicious MILFs. MILF Erotica 9-pack, Threesome Erotica, Breeding Erotica, Anal Sex Erotica, MILF Erotica Collection. Written by Tori Westwood and Nicki Menage. Narrated by Kelly Morgan, Allison O'Keefe, Edie Olliver, Cherry Jett, Sierra Kline and Sallybeth.
Putting my naughty lodger in my tight back door. I'd been cutting Kevin's hair since he moved in to help with the bills several months ago, but it was no stretch of linguistics to say that day's haircut was unlike any that either of us had ever experienced. He'd asked for a cut only a few days previously, needing it in time for his 19th birthday that was happening that weekend. My husband was at work, and I'd finally found some time in the day to deal with him. "Free for an hour?" I asked, peering into his room at around 10 o'clock in the morning. The sheet shuffled quickly, and his head peered out over the top. "Uh-huh," he said, and I knew better than to linger. "See you out there," I said, leaving quickly. We had a building out back that we'd converted years ago into my own little salon, with a pool table and sofas for entertaining when necessary. I was really proud of the place, and I used it to cut the hair of many of the neighborhood guys as well as some of my husband's friends and colleagues. It even got to the point where Kevin was bringing his friends over to get a haircut. Day by day, it was paying for itself, and I'd always enjoyed cutting hair. One of the reasons Kevin's friends would come over was apparently down to the fact that many of them had the hots for me. My husband had overheard them talking one evening in Kevin's room and had decided to tell me to give me a boost of confidence. It really worked. It was nice to know I could still tempt people half my age with my womanly curves. Those hours in the gym didn't go unnoticed. I heard Kevin come down the stairs a few minutes later in his dressing gown, and I opened the back door and headed up to the salon ahead of him. "Would you like some breakfast after?" I said, looking back as he sleepily staggered up the garden path. "Thanks, Mrs. Green," he said, his throat a little raspy. "Were you out last night?" "It was a quiet one with some friends," he said with a yawn. "Get in here, you animal," I teased, ruffling his hair as he walked in. He slipped his feet along the ground and sat heavily in the chair. "The usual?" I said, toying with his locks and looking at his face in the mirror. He seemed a little put out as he stared back, but eventually he composed himself. "Uh-huh," he said. I flung the cover sheet over him to stop the hair from getting on his gown and tied it at his neck with the Velcro. "You're talkative this morning," I teased, spraying some water on his hair and combing it through. He looked up at me timidly. "What's wrong?" "Mrs. Green," he said, and I became nervous suddenly. "Your shirt is kinda—" I moved aside and looked at my reflection, noticing immediately that some of the buttons at the top had popped open, and you could see a good chunk of my big tits and white-laced bra. "Whoops." I laughed as I moved away, covering myself back up briskly. "Nothing you haven't seen before," I said, raising an eyebrow to him as I returned in behind him. He swallowed hard, as though he knew I was talking about those dirty websites that I'd found on our laptop that time. From then on, the haircut continued as normal, or so I thought. Kevin would make these movements with his hands under the covers, and I presumed at the time he was just batting the hair down onto the floor. Every so often, I'd look at his reflection in the mirror, and he'd have this serene, almost blissful look on his face, looking kind of sleepy. "You okay?" I asked, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "Uh-huh," he said suddenly, startling. I looked down over his shoulder to see something protruding up against the sheet. At first I thought nothing of it, but when I watched a hand move at either side of the bulge, I started to get ideas. I said nothing, but now all I could think about was Kevin's hard cock sat beneath the fabric. Suddenly, his expressions and movements made sense to me. I cut his hair in silence with a sinful idea in mind for when I was finished. Now, usually, my routine is to grab the smaller mirror and show him the back of his head for approval, but this time I'd do no such thing. I gave
Sample complete. Ready to continue?